Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the producers panel. It's very exciting to have all these nominees will be shortly joining us. But first, I'd like to thank UGG for being the presenting sponsor of the festival. Yes, thank you. Yes. Yeah, the past 2 years, as you know, has not been easy for nonprofits, and it's amazing to have the support of UGG. Plus, they're super comfortable. Also, on a different note, we've been raising funds for the Ukraine, and all the funds are going to Direct Relief International. And so far, the last tally is we've raised $56,000. So yes, thank you for your support. SBIFF.org/Ukraine. Now, I will leave the stage and let you watch clips from all the nominated films. There's about 10 minutes of clips, and then I'll come back and introduce the panelists. So have fun. Please welcome Teruhisa Yamamoto, Drive My Car. Tim White, King Richard. Patrick Waxberger, CODA. Tanya Segachin, The Power of the Dog. Mary Parrott, Dune. Sarah Murphy, Licorice Pizza. Kevin Messick, Don't Look Up. And J. Miles Dale, Nightmare Alley. And Becca Kobasic, Belfast. And please welcome your moderator, LA Times film columnist. Sorry, I was going to say critic, Glenn Whipp. Thank you.
It's good to be back in person again. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for coming today. Well, let's talk about some of these movies that we just saw. Great lineup, great lineup of Best Picture nominees this year. So we'll talk about the films, talk a little about the Oscars, the robust shape of movie-going these days, and all that good stuff, and maybe have a couple of, and the art of producing. I should start with the Santa Barbara native, shouldn't I? Mary Parent. Mary Parent, producer of Dune. So Santa Barbara, how much time have you spent in the Arlington Theater?
I will never forget seeing Star Wars here for the first time.
Nice. So this place has good memories for you then.
Great memories.
The thing I always wondered about Dune was, I saw it back in late August, early September. It ends and it's Dune Part 1. But when I saw it, there was like no guarantee that there was going to be a Part 2, which I thought was going to be kind of sad if you went to all that trouble to make Dune Part 1 and there's no Part 2. When was that decision made for Part 2 to come about then?
First of all, you're right. We made half a movie, which, Denis was very clear when he first came aboard that the book, Frank Herbert's book, would be too much for one film, which I agreed with immediately. And then in post is when he thought we should call it Part 1, which I thought absolutely, but this won't go well if there isn't a Part 2, but let's be bold and try. And we waited. Denis was working on the script, but we waited to release the movie and, have it be successful enough that we could, bring Part 2.
So it was pretty much like that opening weekend, right? And then you guys got a call and like, we'd like to make Part 2. You guys.
Yeah, it felt the opening was strong and you could feel the swell. And so it felt like we had enough belief that the movie, which now has done over 400 million, and it was also on HBO Max, it was a hybrid release, that we felt like the support was there to bring part two. So we start that later this summer.
Yeah, that's exciting. And part of the deal for part two is that part two won't be day and date on HBO Max, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Denny was not too pleased with the whole day and date.
You know what? Warner's has been a great partner. It was a tricky time. It was a very tricky time, and we collectively decided we had already held the movie a year, so we could have taken it out of the program and waited another year, which felt, too long, and we did believe that the film would connect with audiences, so we thought, let's go for it, and then we'll be able to bring part two sooner, Had we waited, also, there was no guarantee that the world would be, significantly different, so we've all moved, past that, and the success has been good for all stakeholders.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was important for him just to make sure it was going to be in theaters. When you're working with someone with as much passion as Denis, and you go back with Dune, 2013, right?
Yeah, I sold it to, I didn't work at Legendary at the time, but I was producing the first Godzilla, which was a Legendary movie, and so I sold it to Alex Garcia, who's now on my team on the set. And then when I got to Legendary, the rights still hadn't closed, so it was sort of destiny, that I ended up there, and we got the rights closed, and then I read an article that Denis wanted to direct it, which was the easiest director search I've ever had. It'll never happen again.
Yeah, when you have somebody like that who is going to be so passionate about the material that has been filmed before, and it's such a the book is this, so. And there's a lot going on. Families, spices, sandworms, all kinds of things. And it's a lot to fit into one movie. So, yeah, I'm glad there's a part two. I'm glad we're going to continue that
Us
saga.
too.
Yeah, I bet you are. Talking about passionate collaborators, Tim White, you had a very passionate co-producer on board with Will Smith. The thing I loved about reading about your journey first of all, so you played junior tennis yourself?
Yeah, exactly. So I basically grew up playing junior tennis, and that was where I was really first introduced to Richard Williams as a character. I remember, I think in maybe the late 90s, basically seeing him there in the stands, sort of holding up a sign that just said, "Told you so." And it was something that just sort of always stuck with me for all these years, was this image of this guy who had this dream, and that basically everyone out there told him it was not possible, and he basically wrote a plan, and the plan came true. So really, it was a character that we knew and we loved, and I think around, 2014 maybe or so, I sent an email to Venus. I got her email through, I can't remember how, but I sent her a completely cold email, and obviously she didn't respond to it. It sounded, totally crazy, I'm sure. So, we basically set out at that point in time to find the writer who could actually write a script that would be undeniable and that would basically go around town and people would take notice of, and the script would actually be the vehicle that I think we thought would get their attention. And, shockingly, ultimately, we found Zach Balin, and we met with him in 2017, and gave him this impossible task to write this script that would be totally totally undeniable. And he did it, and the script went around, and it ultimately got Will Smith interested. And then at that point, it got to the Williams sisters, and we could have a real conversation with them.
How old were you when you were a junior tennis player and you saw that sign?
Well, I think at that point, I would have been 17, but when I first sort of saw Richard, I was probably about 12.
And how old are you now?
39.
So like 20 years.
Yeah.
What a trippy thing to make this movie after like that experience. And the thing about, you mentioned Zach Balin, so you're looking around, you're trying to find a writer. You interviewed a lot of writers for this story. It's a complicated story about a complicated man. You meet Zach, and it's like, I think you were meeting him for something else, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then he mentioned he was going to the U.S. Open. And you were like, oh, well, by the way, I have this, we have this, you and your brother, we have this other thing we're trying to get made.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think at the time, we didn't even know exactly what our movie was. We just knew Richard Williams was a great character. And we had heard takes for a couple years at this point of everything from the movie starts in 1978 and it ends in 2015, which we knew we didn't want to do. But we also heard takes that the whole movie is the road trip from Compton to Rick Macy Academy in Florida. And I think that felt too narrow. So ultimately, that day, Zach just responded to the character right away. And we were actually sort of in talks with another writer who, I was kind of unsure about their take, but we wanted to get it going. And Zach said, give me a couple days and I'm going to send you something. And a couple days later, he sent us an email that was the movie. It was the starting point, the sort of end of the movie, the character. He really captured the sort of core of the character. And to this date, it was one of the best emails I've ever read. And Zach and I actually reread that email a couple weeks ago, and it's pretty shocking, really, how much that email is what the movie is at the end of the day.
How long is that email?
It's only a page long, but that's all it took, really, to, sum up. But, I think now, when we watch the movie and think about it, it just seems so obvious that this is what it would be. But, it's important to remember for us that for years it wasn't obvious. We had no idea what it was. And, it just shows, a great writer sort of connecting with material that they really respond to is a pretty powerful thing.
And I saw, well, there goes the water, but that's okay. I saw Will Smith at Screen Actors Guild Awards winning the Best Actor award. And man, he just seemed so passionate about this film. That's somebody, as a fellow producer, must have been somebody. I mean, when you speak with him, it's just like his determination and enthusiasm. It's contagious, isn't it?
Yeah, the first time we met with Will about this, he said right away, I've never met Richard, but I know this guy because of how I know my own father, right, and because of the way I am with my own kids. And so Will just connected with material, I think, on a different level from everyone else. And it was really that connection that he had that I think largely drove the entire movie. He was he was very much the leader in terms of just the passion and for what, just sort of the way he understood the project. And I think the character in a way, that, I think drove the process.
Becca.
Yes.
So, I mean, just about all these movies. Well, all these movies had to be. We've all been dealing with COVID. Everyone in this room, everyone on this stage. Belfast. I mean, you got to admire, I guess, Kenneth Branagh. He's like, well, the world's shutting down. I'm going to write this movie that he's been thinking about for a long time, right?
Yes, for about 50 years, he said.
So yeah, I've been thinking about this movie for 50 years. I can't go outside. I can't go to I can't see anybody. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write this movie. And that was March of 2020. Yeah, time's impossible these days. And then September 2020, shooting, right?
August 2020.
Okay. August. So, I mean, I guess he had 50 years of ramp to get there, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's pretty amazing. I think, with the lockdown due to COVID brought him back to the lockdown that he experienced, back in Belfast in 1969, when his street was blocked off with barricades. And he talks about how the silence of the time, there are no planes flying overhead, and there was, that we didn't have much to do, sort of gave him the opportunity, the story, sort of bubbled up in him and flowed out of him. And, I think we all know, what a talented and accomplished actor and director Ken is, but I think, one doesn't realize what a brilliant writer, you forget because of all the other things that he does, what a brilliant writer he also is. So the screenplay flowed out of him, and he shared it with us early on in the spring. I can't quite remember when, April or May. And yeah, we thought it was brilliant right off the bat. I mean, it's so full of emotion and heart and vulnerability and this incredibly personal story, coming out of Ken. And so, we were excited. Also we gave us something to do, in the pandemic when we were all kind of reading novels and twiddling our thumbs and things, but and being nervous and scared. So it was a great, it was a great opportunity to be productive at the very start of the pandemic.
Do you think the film would have been shot on location had there not been COVID?
Yeah, I think definitely more would have been shot in Belfast. And he was able to get some exteriors and do some shots in Belfast, but the majority had to be shot in England, mostly because his longtime collaborators he wasn't able to get to Ireland due to COVID. So he wanted to work with his people that he already knew and trusted and had a shorthand with.
So instead of going on location, you built this set.
Exactly.
And I guess the cool thing about that was that, okay, so it's like how a lot of sports teams were at that time too. Everybody was just kind of had their own little bubble.
Right.
But when you're making a movie about a close-knit family, if they have to spend a lot of time together, then that's going to obviously bleed over into probably the what's on screen, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it was an opportunity. I mean, Ken engenders that in his cast anyway. I think in the beginning of the production, we actually weren't on set. Laura Barrick, my producing partner, and I weren't on set, and because of COVID, we couldn't travel over there. And our co-producer, Tamar Thomas, was on set with Ken. So we weren't sort of involved in the experience of being on set. But, I think in the beginning, Ken brought all his cast together, and their natural instinct was to ask him about his family and his parents and his grandparents, whatever parts they were playing. And he turned it around on them and said, actually, tell me about your family. Tell me about how you grew up. And sharing those personal family stories created this, they were vulnerable with one another and they shared their upbringing and things. And so it created an immediate family bond that I think comes across in the film.
Oh yeah, I mean, it really does. You really feel that family unit, the love, yeah.
And they
Very
still
much
feel
so.
like a family. They all, they're brilliant together. They joke around together, and everyone, Jamie and Jude, are always teasing one another. And Judi Dench is a real, tease and practical joker and things. So they all really bonded.
Yeah, I spoke with Judy and Branna together, and they've known each other for so long. I love how she just takes the piss out of them.
Absolutely.
And in a way that only Judi Dench can. Yeah, cool. Patrick Waxberger. I got it right, right? Congratulations, CODA, Screen Actors Guild, 2 awards on Best Ensemble. And
Thank you.
Troy Kotzer, Supporting Actor. And this is a movie, I interviewed Marlee Matlin before Sundance last year. And she obviously is very passionate about this film. Was telling me kind of about the journey, long journey, as all these movies are, all years. But just how, she was adamant that deaf actors be cast in the principal roles, and that financiers were not necessarily on board with that.
She was right. So, yeah, it was a long journey. So, I basically acquired the rights to the French movie. Actually, I acquired 2 rights. The rights to distribute the French movie in the United States when I was basically running the motion picture group at Lionsgate. And I did that to enable me to get the rights to do a remake. The journey started when, I was starting to find a writer to do an adaptation, a US adaptation. And, I think you only do a remake of a movie if you can really elevate the project. I mean, if it's to do a copycat, forget about it. So we had a few finalists, and I remember Sean came in and pitched the project, and it was so good that I said, I don't need to see the other people, but you have to. They're coming this afternoon and tomorrow. I cannot cancel. I said, but please do. I mean, she's the one. So eventually made the deal with Sean, and she wrote an amazing screenplay. I had really no notes. I mean, it was absolutely perfect. And then I immediately realized there was absolutely no way that I could basically do at Lionsgate the movie that should be made and the movie we did. So it was time for me actually to leave as well, the studio, after 6.5 years. And I made a condition to take CODA with me. So Exhibit A, CODA goes with Patrick. So and by the way, the studio probably would have done it with big stars and speaking people, no deaf actors. There was not even in the cart. So then I went, so I left the studio, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I wanted to do CODA, but I also want to retire. For about 15 minutes, I thought of retiring. And so I went to Cannes, and with no offices, nothing, and I walked through the street and meeting all the distributors that I used to do business with for the last 30 years or so, and they say, what are you doing? Well, I am probably going to do a movie called CODA, and then, can we have the screenplay? Sure. So I basically sold make deals on napkins. I'm not a lawyer. I made deals on napkins in Cannes. And then my partner, Philippe Rousselet, who is my producing partner, who basically had produced the original French movie, basically the rights to the original movie were gone back to him. So I had the screenplay, he had the rights to the original movie. So we are very close friends, and we decided to really set up the movie. At the time there was some money missing, and Pathé came in and do kind of the wraparound And then we basically started shooting the movie in Gloucester before COVID. Everything was really smooth, by the way, except, Gloucester is not the cheapest place in the world because, all the benefit that we got, the Teamster took it away. But it was really great. It was a great experience. And then COVID came. So COVID came and we had the post. Post was during COVID, so it was a nightmare. But eventually the movie was completed and, we realized, all of us, that we needed a platform. We needed to show the movie somewhere. We needed a festival. Where do we go? There's only one coming, was Sundance, but not a real Sundance. So we did send the movie to Sundance, and basically they say, okay, we'll take it. And then the rest is history. But then we closed the deal with Apple Plus, which were absolutely amazing, except I had to undo all the deals that I made in Canon napkins. So I was told by some really, really smart agent, yeah, don't worry, it's gonna be okay. You give them 20% more of what they were gonna pay you, and they will give you the rights back. Not at all. It was like, listen, when we saw you in Cannes and you basically talk about the movie, we were here to help you, and if the movie was really bad, you would not ask for it back, would you? Well, probably right. So we're going to keep it. So then it was really complicated, but Apple were really, really gracious. Not happy about it, but so the movie is in certain territories is going to be released theatrically. Actually, it just opened in Japan several weeks ago and is doing very well. So it was a long journey, like every movie, as you said.
Yeah. Well, that's why you get paid the big bucks as producer, right? and you like Sean Heater enough to you're working with her again on your next movie, right?
Yes.
Is she writing that now?
I wish she was. Is she? No. She's writing now. Yes. And it's
in between collecting awards. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Tanya Sagachian, Power of the Dog. I read, well, you had, again, another, I feel like another long journey. You helped Jane Campion with her last film, Bright Star, right? So you've known her for quite some time.
Yeah, we met 15 years ago when her script for Bright Star landed on my desk at the UK Film Council, which was the British Film Institute national funds that we had to invest in film. And, Jane is undeniably one of the greatest directors in the world. I didn't realize when I opened the page, first page of that script, that it was a Jane Campion film, and I started reading this script blind, and it blew my brains. So I wrote a love letter to her and her producer saying I'd do anything I could to enable that film to happen, and we made it and became friends. But she then went into television and spent a decade in television making the Top of the Lake series, and I desperately wanted Jane to come back into the feature film world. It's sort of inconceivable, really, but someone who's been with us for 30 years in this business has actually only made 8 feature films, and it hasn't always been easy as a trailblazer like Jane to get the right attention. But I wanted to make sure that with this film that we could do something together that could be something that was the best expression of the story that she wanted to tell. And her stepmother gave her this book, and she gave it to me. We both fell in love with it, and we then discovered that someone else had the rights. And the journey of trying to get the rights was actually a Jane act of seduction. She met the Canadian producer who owned the rights at Cannes, and within an hour he'd said, "You can have it if you want it." And then we started the process of trying to work out how to adapt it and how to make her vision of this very, very lived experience by lesser-known American novelist Thomas Savage, something that we could turn into a screenplay and a film. And you know, she was very committed to the research. We went to Montana, we met his family, we looked at the kind of struggles that he'd had telling a story like this, which had a hidden undercurrent of homosexuality, which at the time wasn't something that could be made explicit, and how she, as a writer and director, could shape this story in a way that would honour what Savage had done, bring her own unique vision to the page, and make it relevant to an audience today who might only have one vision of the American West. And it was an extraordinary process of developing and producing it with her, because she's a real visionary, and she's a really generous visionary, and so she shares every step of the process with you on the way. So as a producing experience, I think it's not just the beauty of being able to make a film like that, but to work with someone like Jane, who is always looking at what she can share with an audience or with new generations of filmmakers or her colleagues.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, you mentioned a number of people have had the rights to this novel over the years. Paul Newman apparently had the rights.
Yeah, he and you can imagine why Paul Newman would have wanted them. Apparently it was Gérard Depardieu's favourite film and favourite book as well, and something that he was interested in. But we used that as part of our kind of mindset, psyche set, for thinking about Bronco Henry and who that kind of other figure might be, the kind of ghost figure in the story. We said to Benedict, well, you know, could have been Paul Newman.
And you mentioned that you went to Montana. Did you want to shoot it in Montana originally, or did you hope to set it here, and then why then you ended up having to create just basically the whole kind of town in New Zealand?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we started, we assumed we would shoot it in Montana, and we really enjoyed our experience, but we also didn't find the ranch, and it became very clear that we would have to build the ranch, that it didn't exist in a sort of old state. All the ranches that would have been appropriate had been very modernized, and so once a build became the central production challenge, it was clear that we may as well go somewhere where we could maximize on the tax credits, and that Jane could work with her people. And Grant Major, who was our production designer, had worked with her on An Angel at my table and then gone on to do Lord of the Rings. So we were really confident that we could bring someone like Grant on, and that he would be able to build this ranch in the middle of nowhere in really difficult conditions, but make it feel like pioneer country. And Jane found an extraordinary part of the South Island, the Hawkden Range in central Otago, and we began the build.
Yeah, there's a great little special on Netflix. I think it's maybe 20 minutes, 18, 20 minutes of kind of the making of this movie. And there's just some really wonderful shots of the sets being constructed and the filming. If you've seen the movie on Netflix, I definitely recommend that.
But it was funny, Kirsten and Jesse, who obviously were, their childhood stars and Hollywood pros, they came on the set and they said they'd never been on a set quite like it. And so we felt that having made that decision to go to New Zealand was one that had obviously been honoured creatively, because our two American leads were absolutely captivated by what they saw in front of them. So.
Yeah. Originally it was going to be Elizabeth Moss and Paul Dano, right, in those roles.
Yeah, and I think, it's kind of probably the bane of all of us producers trying to work out how to make schedules work. We lost both Elizabeth and then Paul in pre-production, and we knew that We had a weather window that we could work within. The crew were all building the ranch. And we were really lucky. We managed to convince both Kirsten, who'd always wanted to work with Jane, and Jane had always wanted to work with Kirsten, and Jesse to join us. And they are a couple in real life. So in actual fact, they were able to bring a really special quality to the film, and that kind of sense of real grounded poetry. Like my favorite scene in the film is the one where just after their wedding, Kirsten teaches Jesse to dance on Queenstown Hill. They stepped up and in and committed to us, and we were really, really blessed that they brought that quality to the film.
Kevin Messick, you've worked with Adam McKay much over the years. So he writes this script for, I always want to keep saying don't look back, but it's don't look up. Yeah. He writes this spec script for Don't Look Up, and you guys send it out. And like pretty much immediately, he wrote a nice piece for the Times about this, like saying that the no's were swift from several studios, saying we like this, but don't really like the ending. Is that the ending? Did that start to did we end it the right way, or what were you thinking when you were getting this initial response?
He wrote it. He just shot this pilot for the Lakers show that comes out tomorrow, and he went away for Christmas 19.
Plug.
Yep. And he came back after Christmas with a script. The first person we sent it to actually was Jen Lawrence, because that's who he wrote it for. So she was in within 24 hours. And then the question was, as we started to kind of fill out the cast, sharing it with studios, and I think Adam's memory, it wasn't that bad. There was a lot of interest in the film. But yeah, he was right. He was right that nobody wanted an ending where we killed everybody and the world blew up. So, but that's kind of...
Spoiler alert, by the way.
It's been out long enough. But that was the point of the movie. So it wasn't ever going to change. And then I think some studios appreciated the absurdist satire, but didn't want to pay for the disaster element. And you kind of need both. And we found a perfect partner in Netflix that were interested in both, who also were nervous about the ending until we actually tested the film. So.
They were nervous about the ending until you tested the film, and when you tested the film, audiences kind of dug I found the ending to be quite moving. The family, the makeshift family sitting around the table, and appreciating those small moments and their relationships together.
I think to Netflix's credit, they allowed us to make the film we wanted to make, but they were unabashedly nervous about that ending and how audiences would receive it. Adam's point was that he wanted to change the narrative of the story that he was telling, and that was part of it. And the first test screening that we had, that dinner table scene was and remained the highest rated scene in the film. So audiences both kind of felt it. It landed squarely on them emotionally. They appreciated it. And from that, after that night, Netflix stepped away from ever talking about it again. So it was good.
That's interesting. That was what people liked the best about the movie.
Yeah, that it didn't. Somebody didn't swoop in to save the day, which was kind of the flip that Adam was doing with a lot of the disaster movies that have been made, over time. Somebody always comes in and saves the day, and in this case, part of the climate analogy or the COVID analogy that it ultimately became as well, is that you got to listen to the science, or this could happen.
Yeah, otherwise, the asteroid would normally just somehow disintegrate in the atmosphere, or one of those ships would have blown it up, or who knows. But yeah, that's what we're used to seeing in this type of movie. Correct. Will Smith would save the day normally.
Or right? Bruce Willis.
And those are fun too.
So you were, I think, you guys were hoping to start a conversation with this movie. How did that conversation go, do you think?
It's ongoing. I think that the kick in the pants that he wanted the movie to, the alarm bells in his head about the climate led him as an artist to kind of write this big, noisy, emotional, provocative film. And there was a lot of like-minded people, our cast kind of first in line, that all wanted to help him tell that story. And I think after the film came out, the success that it had on Netflix was also met with this incredible appreciation from the climate scientists that the movie's kind of a love letter to, who basically have stood up to a T and said, I felt the same way that Jen Lawrence does when she got ridiculed when she went on TV and said, we're all gonna fucking die, you know, or they felt seen, you know, and had gone through many of the trials and tribulations that our two characters went through. And it's kind of notched up to a different level. Don't Look Up has become a phrase in the public lexicon for kind of when you deny reality or deny facts. There was this sad but crazy story the day that Russia invaded Ukraine. And NPR ran this clip, and there was this chef who said that he couldn't get out of the city, and he closed down his restaurant and had his family and his workers there kind of to keep them safe. And we couldn't believe it. He says, I just started cooking borscht, and it made me happy, and it made me feel better. And he goes, I felt like I was in that last scene of that movie, Don't Look Up. It's crazy, crazy. Yeah. So the movie, and again, with the kind of the power of that Netflix platform, is out in parts of the world and people responding to it that we would never, ever have imagined. And that was, you know, part of the conversation starter that the film was meant to be.
Wow. Drive My Car. Yamamoto, yes. Your film, and I'm a member of the Los Angeles Film Critics Association, so New York film critics beat us to it. Best Picture. LA Film Critics, Best Picture. Then National Society of Film Critics, Best Picture. Guess you have to love the critics, right? How did you feel about those three groups, which are the most prestigious film critics groups? Did that give your film kind of like a level of awareness that might not have had otherwise?
そうですね。本当に評論家の皆さんのおかげだと本当に思っています。
Yes, I definitely think it is because of the critics and all the organizations that helped elevate the movie.
Yeah, it was always the challenge, because if you see this movie, it's just such a moving, affecting film. But you have to kind of convince people that it's worth taking 3 hours to go on this this emotional journey, and that you need to not just take the 3 hours, but to turn off your phones and give it your undivided attention, because it's not a movie that you can just kind of, be doing Wordle while you're watching it. Did you expect when you gave the material, like, that it would come back as a 3-hour screenplay?
最初は2時間半だと思います。
At first, it was supposed to be 2.5 hours.
It was supposed to be 2.5 hours. Okay, but he convinced you otherwise.
いや、彼も2時間半だと思っていた。
He was also aiming for it to be 2.5 hours.
で、編集したら3時間半になったって。
And then after editing, it turned out to be 3.5 hours.
First edit.
The first edit was 3.5 hours.
So we could see a director's cut on the home on Blu-ray. That's an extra half hour of
それは彼は多分ノーと言うだろう。
He'll most likely say no to that.
and you guys are working together again right now?
そうですね。いくつか彼とは話している。
Yeah, we're currently in talks about a few ideas.
You're being kind of evasive, I feel like. Not ready to drop the news on this, but okay.
Thank you.
Were you? I mean, okay. So you get the critics groups on your side. Were you surprised that people? Were you when the Best Picture? Best Picture is announced. Where were you when the Oscars nominations were announced?
夜日本で自宅で聞いてたんですけど、まあ今ここにいるのが信じられないくらいに今でも驚いている。
So I heard of the nomination. It was at night in Japan.
Okay.
I was at home, and I'm still in disbelief that I'm actually here celebrating.
First time in the United States, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the last category, and they're doing Belfast, CODA, Don't Look Up, Drive My Car. I'm doing alphabetical here because that's how they would be announced. So it's like the fourth one announced. Did you just like go? I mean, what was your reaction?
Oh.
Because I was shocked. And I love this movie.
いやーショックでしたね。めちゃくちゃ驚いた。
Yeah. Likewise, I was very shocked.
Yeah.
監督にメールを打って本当に驚くべきことが起きたと。でも彼はドイツに行ってる飛行機の上だったんで。
So I messaged the director saying, you wouldn't believe what just happened. But he was actually in an airplane flying to Germany. So he didn't quite get it until a little later.
Okay. Well, congratulations and welcome to the States here.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sarah Murphy, Licorice Pizza. We were talking earlier because I was trying to figure out. I've talked to Paul Thomas Anderson a lot about his genuine enthusiasm in making those music videos for the band Haim, who have performed on this very stage. And that was kind of your way in as producer, because Alana Haim was, much to her surprise, I think, was cast as the lead. And then you came on board because you've known Paul through making those music videos, right?
I actually know Paul. I worked with Philip Seymour Hoffman for many years, and so I had known Paul just through him working on The Master and had been with him through all of that. But yes, Paul came to me when he wanted to start kind of getting back into music videos again, and I had made a couple of very small independent films, and he identified me as somebody that could make something with no money. So we started making music videos with Radiohead and Haim, and sort of always had an idea that maybe we would work together on a feature, and this sort of organically became the one.
He was saying that, I mean, he wanted all these Haim music videos are on YouTube. I think he wants to put them out all together in some great package. But he was saying like I think there's a real through line between you watch those videos, the vibe of those videos, and the vibe of the movie. It's kind of the same, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I was saying to you earlier, the collaboration of the Haim girls and Paul, I think, gives him the greatest joy. So whenever they get together, I'll get that call the next day that's like, so I was with Danielle last night, or I was with Alana last night, and you're like, oh no, what's coming? This one was different because I think Paul wrote this with Alana in mind, I think just because it made him so happy, and I think the writing of it therefore came very quickly to him. I think it was something he really loved making, and it came fast, and that was kind of the nature of the production of the film as well. I mean, it was a very familial. I mean, everybody in the movie is Paul's family or friends, or the Haim family and their friends. And so there's a sort of a lightness and continuity through all of these experiences.
How have you known Cooper Hoffman all of his life, basically?
Yes, I met Cooper Hoffman when he was 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's got to be a trip for you to see him, like, as the lead in this, well, and Alana too, but I mean, especially Cooper, you've known since before he was walking, or right when he started to walk. And now he's amazing in this movie.
Yeah, it was a trip. I mean, Cooper's always been the most sort of empathic, wonderful joy of a human. And when Paul had actually met with many other kids for the role, and kind of called me one day, and he was like, "What, Cooper?" And I was like, "Oh my God, that's terrifying. Is that a good idea? Should we do that?" And I think it was a very good idea. But it was also funny because while we were shooting during COVID, his mother has 2 other children, and they are living in New York. And so he had to be here. He's underage, and he needed a guardian. So that became me. And Cooper and I lived together during the making of the film in the Valley.
And there was another Cooper in the film, Bradley Cooper, who you only had for a few days because he had to go make another one of our movies here. So you had to, like, with his schedule for Nightmare Alley, you basically had to do his, handful of scenes first, right? But Paul worked that to kind of the advantage of the film, didn't he?
Yeah, yes. Because we were going to lose Bradley too at Nightmare Alley, we had to pull up our schedule too. So everything was our prep was condensed, and we were sort of gunning to go to make sure we didn't lose him for eternity. And it was funny because Alana and Cooper obviously had spent a great deal of time together and had rehearsed and knew each other, and studied lines together. But their first scene was when Bradley storms out of the house and is like, who's in charge here? And Cooper describes it as just, I think they were both like, holy shit. And they had not met him, and they had not even said hello to him. So they just kicked it off in that great way. But it was, I think, the perfect energy for that scene, obviously, but then really bonded, I think, Alana and Cooper further there too, because they were like, what have we gotten ourselves into? And also, oh, that's acting.
And so then he left and he went to Nightmare Alley, and you had him. And one great thing I love about, so many Nightmare Alley nightmare stories, it sounds like, in making this movie during COVID. But one weird one, I guess, was that, and again, we're like spoilers. Where's Nightmare Alley streaming right now?
It's on HBO Max and on
HBO
Hulu.
Max, right? Yeah. So hopefully you've seen it. I don't know. But the last shot of this movie, Nightmare Alley, just one of the great last shots of any film. Just loved it. But you're going to shoot this, and there were hurricane winds coming. Is that what was the story? I just heard hurricane winds when you're trying to nail this, just like what the movie had been building for 2.5 hours, or 2 hours 15, 2:20, to get to this last shot. And then there's hurricane winds.
Well, we were shooting at the Carnival for a lot of the movie. I mean, I don't know if anyone knows, but first of all, I will say, in terms of this group, making movies is hard enough in general. Getting it sold, getting it made, getting it out, and everything. And producers generally have a lot of respect for each other because we know that we're herding cats and, dealing with directors whose aspirations generally exceed the budget and the schedule. But I think this year, especially, there's extra respect because it was very difficult whether you were shooting or prepping or posting in COVID. So for us, we shot for 6 weeks, we shut down for 6 months, we learned how to come back safely, and we came back and we shot the Carnival, having shot most of the second half of the film. In our minds, the whole movie was kind of a prologue to the end, where Stan becomes what everyone knew he might become, what he knew he was, what he was hoping to be found out to be. We were shooting at the Carnival, and I said to Bradley and Guillermo, we had planned to maybe have to shoot this ending a few times, given the emotionality of it and everything, and we were kind of ready for that. We had this trailer, and yeah, we were shooting at the Carnival. Bradley was dressed for another scene, and I said, guys, you know what? It's blowing 1,000,000 miles an hour out there. We can't shoot, so it's either shoot the ending or go home. And to Bradley's credit, we looked at each other, and he said, sure, let's try. And he got into his crazy beard and everything else, and we went in, and the first completed take is the one that's in the movie. So, I mean, if you needed to know more about Bradley as an actor, I mean, he stuck the landing. And we did a couple more takes just for fun, and, it didn't happen. So, yeah, that's what happened. Look, these are the crazy things about movie making. I mean, you have to pivot, and in COVID, where it was more difficult to pivot, we pivoted. We didn't have a lot of cover. I mean, he was in every scene, and most of it was outside. I mean, it's either raining or snowing in basically every scene in the movie. So if you're outside, if the lights are going to blow down or something, you got to try and do something else. And that was the only thing we could do. So yes, you are right. It was a hurricane.
Your pivot was that you shot 6 weeks, and then COVID hit, and then you had a 6-month break. The 6 weeks that you shot were mostly from toward the last third of the movie. So in the 6 months in between, did you and Guillermo go back and make any changes to what you were going to, how the script, how you're going to approach it? Did it inform? Yeah.
Yeah, it did. It was really interesting, actually, because we were able to put the second half of the movie together, spend a lot of time in the cutting room, and it did inform it. We were kind of able to reverse engineer some of the relationships, specifically the Stan-Molly relationship with Bradley and Rooney's characters, because of what had evolved. I mean, there was a lot of evolution in the material every day. Bradley and Guillermo will tell you this. Going to that dark place for these characters, every day there was something kind of new being explored and found, and it wasn't always exactly what was on the page. So what happened in the second half of the movie, we were able to cut it, put it together, look at it, and then there were certainly rewrites in the first half. Also the Carnival that we were building in a hurry wasn't really going to be ready, so we had kind of some extra time, and it sort of aged very naturally in the wind and the snow and the sun. And so you take what the universe gives you, and in this case I think we would have preferred not to have all those circumstances, but it was a good thing because we were able to take a little time and really fine-tune the movie and the script and the cut and everything else, and be ready when we came back once we got Bradley back from Sarah.
And then after it came out, you guys got creative and put out a different version of the movie, a black and white version.
Yeah, we had always intended, it's kind of like a black and white movie that was shot in color, in homage to noir. It's not a noir movie, but it feels it. You can really see it in the shadow. And so, we shot it, Dan and Guillermo, talked very early about having those contrast ratios in such a way that we could put it out in black and white. So in a way, it was always meant to be. And when we went to, color correct the black and white version of the movie, it was very easy because it had been designed with that in mind all the way. Guillermo, we've worked with our artisans, our production designer, costume designer, and cinematographer for a long time, so it was a great shorthand there, and he really considers those things to be one thing. So there's no arbitrary paint color anywhere, and so, when we went to do those things in terms of seeing how Stan's coat was going to contrast against the snow or a wall or anything else, it was all really designed with that in mind. So, that triumvirate of people with Guillermo's kind of, very specific sort of design orientation made it easier to do that.
Okay, so we're here a day after the Batman opened this weekend. $57 million, I believe, last night at the box office. So Batman doing well in theaters. Spider-Man did really well, but are you guys worried at all about the state of moviegoing, and do you think that people, outside of comic books and maybe Scream reboot, have people kind of have grown-ups lost the habit of going to the movies? Or do you think that they'll get back in the habit now that masks will be, and COVID, I don't even want to say the words out loud, that COVID is waning, perhaps?
I believe in the audience, and I think that the audience wants a collective experience. We've been really lucky. We're sitting here together sharing, and I think, the exhibition has gone in cycles in the history of cinema, and we may be going through a moment that's cyclical, but in actual fact, we've been very lucky on the streaming platform to have found new audiences, and what we've been really touched by with the fact that we were able to re-release the film on the back of the extraordinary number of nominations we were lucky enough to get was that people who'd seen it first on Netflix came to the cinema to see it again in the cinema. So I think we just have to believe that this thing we do together is religious and we want it and we'll continue to share it.
I agree. I think, if I may, we're not ready to fold the tent. We're not folding the tent. And I think in terms of the older audience, it's going to take a little longer for them to safely go back to the movie theater. But I think it's a question of time, and I think people are dying to go back to see all kind of movies, not only Marvel and horror movies, but everything in between.
I think the bar is a little higher now, Certainly, people chose to see Dune in the theater, the film was made for the big screen. But I agree, there is nothing. Like I said, I still remember sitting here now when the ship passed over in Star Wars, how it sounded, how it felt, and how visceral that was, and actually how sort of scary it was. And when I saw Star Wars here very young, that experience is unique. But every film has a different path, and having multiple paths isn't a bad thing, because we can get more films made, some of which, maybe wouldn't be getting made at this moment. So I think that's a positive, trying to look at it that way. But I agree, the theater experience is what it is. And right now, certain films are undeniable. And hopefully over time, there'll be more of a collective, like CODA is a film I would have enjoyed in the theater, But I think Apple was a good place for it to be right now in this environment.
Yeah, you can't replace the film experience. I made a movie for Mary that opened up last night. We made it specifically for theaters, and the opportunity for the theatrical opportunities for that film didn't exist. We had it at Sundance. Sundance was virtual, so we never got what we experienced when we were previewing the film last summer, when the restrictions lifted for a couple months and we could actually go out and test the film and see it with 300 people yelling and screaming and having a good time. So it's going to swing back. It's going to be safer, but I think people are going to be choosier on what they see. So we have to make good films.
I'll plug the film for you, Kevin.
Okay.
I didn't produce it. Kevin did. It's called Fresh. First-time female director, Mimi Cave. It's
Opened last night on
excellent.
Hulu.
Yeah, it's on Hulu through Searchlight. Adam McKay, protege, Lauren Kahn wrote it. Kevin and Adam produced it. It's pretty great.
Do you think there's anything that movie theaters could do to make the experience better for moviegoers?
I think you're seeing it. I think the theaters are trying. The Arlington's obviously very unique. But I think the theaters are upping their game, technically at least, in terms of sound and visuals. And then I think over time, the theaters will continue to find ways to be more consumer friendly. But at least the theaters that I go to, and I try to see as much as possible in the theater, the sound and, screen is excellent, which is what, for me at least, I'm most concerned about.
And maybe free parking, that would help too.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. In LA, sometimes, it's hard. It's a bit of a chore to go out. And then I love seeing movies with people, except you're seeing movies with people, and people can sometimes not be so much fun to see movies with because they're on
part of the deal.
I know, they're on their phones, or you get this bright light shining in the middle of some really dramatic moment, or talking. It's like the fear is that the last 2 years everybody's been at home, and now they go out and it's like they're still at home and they haven't forgotten that they're out. But there is nothing like it. I led a conversation with Paul Thomas Anderson and Alana at the Village Theater in Westwood, and there were 1,400 people in that theater. And I remember being, I can't see, the lights were on so I could see out, and there was nothing like seeing that many people in a theater just so loving to be there and experience a movie together. That energy is special. So I'm glad that you're optimistic. I'm gonna carry that with me. You guys are all nominated. Obviously, you're going to the Oscars. Oscars are going to be a little different this year. There's 8 awards that are not going to be presented live during the ceremony. You guys have any thoughts about that? I know, Miles, you tweeted out some thoughts recently saying that maybe not necessarily the best time, given what we've been through the last couple of years, to be, not giving these artisans their moment in the sun?
Well, the actors are all well known, and the directors in the movies, and these people who toil behind the scenes. Sure, they're less famous, but we are nothing if not the sum of all those parts, and it is very much a collaborative experience. So, Will Packer has said that all those people, we're going to hear their names and we're going to hear what they say. So, until we get there, let's give him credit. Look, it is a fine line. It is an entertainment product, the show, and viewership is declining. So, if you're running the show, you've got to address that. So, let's see what happens. He says everyone's going to be heard from and seen, but it is a little disappointing when, especially this year, they choose to make that kind of a change, and those people who you'll never hear from, their speeches are typically shorter than others, are getting shortchanged. So our hopes are high, and let's see what happens.
I think it's all economical. I think, the ABC is really supporting the Academy and the Oscar, and ABC said, we need a shorter show, and that's it. But I agree with him, its timing is not very good.
Yeah, these are integral people to making a film, I agree, it's disappointing, and I don't envy Will. I'll say that, because I think the show needed to evolve on some level, but it's, definitely disappointing.
Yeah, the Oscars are often compared to, they're the Super Bowl of film, say. I don't really ever hear anyone complaining that the Super Bowl is too long. Like, I don't hear, oh, that halftime show took forever, or it feels like the Oscars are the Oscars, and they should act like the Oscars.
I agree.
You know what I'm saying? Like they're trying to be. There's gonna instead of these categories, there's gonna be a couple of fan favorite moments that seem weird, and I don't know. I mean, it's just like, a number of years ago, the honorary Oscars were presented during the evening, and so you would see people like Sidney Poitier receiving an Academy Award. And, I just interviewed Denzel Washington not long ago, and I was watching his Oscars speech when he went for Training Day. And Sidney Poitier had been in the audience that night getting his Oscar. And Denzel, when he's up on stage, holds up his Oscar and says, I'm still following you. I'm still following you. You don't get that moment anymore because that moment isn't on the show. You're taking away like all the moment. Here I am just yammering here. All right.
But you're right. The Oscars are to celebrate movies and how movies are made and the people that make them. And so for any of those artisans or crafts or categories that are made to feel somehow less important, it couldn't be further from the truth. So,
I mean, especially for like so many of these films up here. I mean, Dune's nominated for 10 Oscars, and most of those categories will be presented before the shows goes live. And actually, I think Dune, I don't want to jinx it for you, but I think it's going to win a lot of those Oscars too. Well, here's another. Hans Zimmer, the composer, has never won an Oscar. Hans Zimmer is probably the greatest composer next to, say, John Williams.
Or Nick Britell.
Yes.
Or Johnny Greenwood.
But he has a way. Hans has been doing it for a long time. Finally has a chance to get his Oscar, but it won't be shown live on the ceremony. It's a little disappointing. So you were saying, actors get all the glory, directors get all the credit. What do you guys get? What do producers get? What's the best part of your jobs?
A lot of satisfaction, I think a film that I produced this last fall, it was late at night, it was cold, it was, we've all had those nights, and the script supervisor turned to me and she said, Mary, it's either a job or a passion. And I said, you're right. And none of us were complaining, and we were happy to be there. And I know for me, part of the opportunity is the privilege of getting to support the visions of not just the director, but also the editor and the composer and all the artisans, everyone that it takes, as you point out, Kevin, to make the film. And I love that process, and for me, it's incredibly rewarding. So that's what I take away from it, and all this is wonderful, and it's great and all, but the real satisfying thing is being a part of making something with a group of people.
I think I agree with Mary. I do what I do because I love what I do, and I still can't believe I get paid to do what I love to do. It's such a privilege to make things, and the people we work with make our life bigger, richer. And when you get to work with your heroes, it's the sort of apex of it all, isn't it?
And it's the reaction of the audiences, when people come up to you and say they were moved by your film or it touched their heart, or, back to being in theaters. The communal experience of seeing a movie together, and even with the annoying people occasionally crunching popcorn too loudly or whatever, it's just that, all experiencing something together, tears, joy, laughter, that's really special. And, in Belfast, obviously, Ken, as a child, his escape was the movies, and his imagination came alive in the movies. And, I think all of us were in love with movies growing up, and television and things like that, and the creating of those visions. And so that's the amazing thing, is the reaction of the audiences, and the Movies bring people together, and it create their conversation pieces, and they're inspirational, and they entertain, and they really bring the world together. Really, I mean, they were talking about your movie in the Ukraine, so.
And so I agree with everything everyone said, but also another feeling that we've had a couple times is really when we sort of originate an idea from the start, bring the writer on, we have the idea, or acquire the rights, and at the start of the process, it's so lonely. It's just you and the writer, and you're developing this thing, and it's like from the start that the odds are low that it's ever going to happen, but you're just going ahead anyways. And there's something about showing up on the set the first day, especially if it's a larger movie, and you see a couple hundred people there, and they all have jobs, and they're actors and trailers, and I think you have to just step back at that point and just be like, wow, this all started on a couch with an idea, and the odds were stacked up against it, and now look, there's this whole world that's been created basically around this, one conversation or idea.
I think it's also there's a sense of community that you have when you make a movie. Like when you build yes, it starts with kind of a smaller group, but when you build it out, there are like these little kind of instant families and communities that you have together. And I think for everybody that made stuff during COVID, it was even more of a shared sense of responsibility and a relationship with, that you're out there kind of literally battling crazy odds to get something that you're passionate about made. But it was definitely that kind of feeling that you're all in it together, at least for us when we were making Don't Look Up in winter on the East Coast before vaccines were invented. It just seemed literally crazy to go do something like that. But it was the family that we had that stuck together.
But don't you think it's also lovely to be able to be a role model or have role models? I was just saying to Mary when we came on, I remember some of my first meetings in Hollywood. She was at one of them, and just seeing her in a position of power, with taste, committed to things she wanted to make, made me feel it was possible to be that person too.
Festival brings in a lot of students, film students. They may be probably some in here now. If there are any aspiring producers out here, what advice would you guys give them?
Don't give up.
Yeah, be relentless, exactly. And when people tell you something's not going to work, listen, see if there's some validity, pivot, but believe. You have to believe, and you have to keep moving forward. Again, take in the information of why you're not moving something forward, but you have to be relentless. And I know in the case of Dune, everybody passed, I'm sure everybody here has had experiences on films. The film that Kevin and I just did, people were afraid of. You just have to believe and keep pushing while checking in with yourself to making sure, and what's its reason for being, and it can be simple too, which is you just really want to entertain, but ideally it's like, what is it about at its core, and then where is it distinctive within its genre, and you just keep pushing, really.
Pivot is a word I've heard often on this stage today, so yeah, be adaptable, I guess, right?
Without compromising, because sometimes you'll shoot yourself in the foot. That's the key, right? Which is you want to get something made, but making sure that in doing that, you're not setting yourself up to fail, if that makes sense, diminishing returns or whatever it may be. Sometimes you can take challenges and turn them into strengths. As everyone here will probably tell you, parameters sometimes can lead to better ideas. But sometimes in just trying to get something made, casting the wrong person, hiring the wrong director, whatever it may be, you have to be careful, because then you'll shoot yourself in the foot.
Yep.
All right. Sounds like we're out of advice. I think we're out of time too. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for
Thank
coming.
you.
Thank you.